Welcome to Full Magnitude, where you come to get the full magnitude of what is going on the Earth. And true to form, we are here to discuss today the enslavement of the entire human race. And to discuss that with me is New York Times bestselling author, TV personality on shows such as Ancient Aliens and The Truth Behind the Moon Landings, red-blooded patriot and awesome guy, Mike Bara.
Sean, thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for being on. All right, and you will notice that we are on a new set right above Hollywood Boulevard. The Death Star is fully operational, and we're gonna fire on Endor to test it out. All right, so back to Orange.
All right.
All right, so Mike, you describe yourself as a born-again conspiracy theorist, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you know that it's interesting because what I thought about what do born-again Christians do, right? When they get Jesus in their adult life, it's not something they've been raised with. They proselytize, right? They go out and they just have to tell everybody about Jesus. And I saw this in members of my family and people that I knew, and I thought that's what I am as a conspiracy theorist. Because when I became a conspiracy theorist, I realized the whole world is a lie. There's so much that we're not told the truth about. And once I realized that, I felt like I just had to go out and tell everybody. And so that's why I call myself a born-again conspiracy theorist and a card-carrying member of the military-industrial complex also.
Nice. Yeah, so you started out as an engineer in aerospace,
Aerospace
correct?
engineer, yeah. Worked for Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Bombardier Aerospace, a lot of different aircraft companies, worked on secret secure projects, had security clearances, took lie detector tests. Trust me, that's no fun. You don't ever want to do that. It's not much fun.
Did they pick up on stuff that you were like kind of...
Yeah, they absolutely. I couldn't fool them. There was one question that was kind of interesting. You know, do you consider yourself an honest person? And I thought about one time when I stole candy from a store when I was 8 years old, and then boom, it showed up. You know, and they're like, "What were you thinking about?" And I said, "Well, there was this time I stole a candy bar from Mr. Hoff's corner store."
Yeah,
you
but
know?
They're like checking you off as like sociopath. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, but I mean, I think it actually helped reinforce things for them. But yeah, it's damn hard to beat the machine.
That's cool.
It's worse than the Scientology, you know.
Yeah.
Midichlorians test.
Which, we're doing that afterwards on the corner. There's a lot of Scientology here in Hollywood. So, okay, was it during your time as an aerospace engineer that you started waking up because of the projects you were involved in, or what kind of first keyed you into this world that, like, what we're presented on TV is not the world we actually live in?
Not so much that. It was really one specific incident. It was the shoot down, and I'm going to call it a shoot down, of TWA 800 in 1996, which was a 747 just taken off out of JFK, was flying, I think, over Long Island, and exploded in midair. And they came on and they showed the coverage, and we saw the flaming wreckage in the water. And my wife at the time asked me, well, what could cause that? And I said, airplanes do not explode in midair all by themselves. It had to be a bomb or a missile. And I then watched over the next days and weeks and even months, and they would have these briefings about this. And these people would get up there and they would say things that I categorically knew to be false. Oh, we think there was a spark in the center fuel tank. That never happens. I'm just gonna tell you, it doesn't happen, okay? Even if it did, the fuel, the JP4 fuel that was used in the aircraft would not ignite. It's not volatile, it's more like kerosene. Jet fuel is more like kerosene, and basically you have to put the fuel, you have to mix it with air under incredibly high pressure and basically hit it with a 2,000-degree blowtorch to get a jet engine to run. So the center fuel tank, it's not going to explode. And I knew this was all lies. And then I started looking into it. In fact, I have some slides if you want to.
Yeah, let's pull them on up.
This is an example of the wreckage. And just the whole thing had been blown up, and you could actually see when they initially brought the pieces back that on one side of the aircraft the metal was beveled in right about the center of the aircraft. On the other side it was beveled out. That means something passed through it, which means a missile. And then the CIA came up, of all people, with this ridiculous animation.
Its head just fell off.
The front of the they think this is the center fuel tank exploded, the front of the airplane fell off, and then they had the back end of the aircraft shooting straight up and flying another, dozens of miles and then crashing into the ocean.
It propelled itself into the ocean?
Exactly. And now, what I knew about airplanes, being an aerospace engineer, is that the instant that those cables were severed, the engines cut off. So the engines do not continue to run after that.
Right, okay.
The thrust is 0. The other part is that the heaviest part of an aircraft is the tail section, the empennage. So instead of zooming up and floating, and which they had to do to justify the debris field that they had found, what would have happened is the tail would have just gone like this and it would have dropped straight down. So that was completely a lie. I knew from every single bit of it was a lie. The media then repeated the lie. Nobody questioned it. Anybody that they had on that did question it got shot down right away. And
The character attack them and all that kind of
right,
stuff.
all kinds of character attacks. And then you even had there was a wedding going on Long Island where somebody took a picture of the wedding, and in the background, it was later came out, you could actually see the bright dot there is a missile, and the object at the small end there, the lower end with the bright dot, that's the aircraft. And so this missile was zooming in on the aircraft, and then there were radar tapes that were found that actually showed a missile coming up from the sea into the air and merging with TWA 800. And when this radar tape was brought out by Pierre Salinger, who was the press secretary for President John F. Kennedy, he was torn apart. His character was completely torn apart. And he said, look, the bottom line is that this radar tape is authentic. I'm the one who obtained it. I got it from such and such a guy. And then what they did is they charged the guy who released the radar tape. First of all, they said the radar tape was false. It was a fabrication. And then they charged him, you know what they charged him for? Theft of government property, specifically the radar tapes. So how could the radar tapes be government property and yet be a fabrication? They couldn't. And so the bottom line is, at that point, I knew that they'd been lying about everything. They paid Boeing off with a bunch of defense contracts after that to say, oh yeah, well, we did an experiment and it's possible
Wait,
you
they
could have a
did? They
spark.
admitted it?
Yep. Well, no, they didn't really admit it, but they basically funneled a bunch of defense work towards Boeing after that over the next 5 years. And Boeing said they did an experiment where, oh gosh, this could have happened. And there is no way. Frayed wire sparks aren't going to ignite a center fuel tank under any
Okay, so they basically got paid off to just agree with it.
got paid off to agree with it.
So did you ever see any information whether there was some VIP on board with critical information, or if it was another country, or who was behind it?
What I eventually determined happened, a lot of, most people agree with this, is that there was actually a military exercise going on, live fire military exercise, and TWA 800 was supposed to be about 7,000 feet higher up than it was, but because of some other traffic that got in the way, it was ordered down below 13,000 feet, which put it right in the radar track of this missile. So they were firing a missile as part of their military exercises, and it locked onto the aircraft and shot it down. And the Clinton administration wanted it completely suppressed because it was July of an election year. He was going against Bob Dole, so he's going to win anyway. But that's why it was suppressed. And it was, at that point, I just realized you can't trust anything you see on the news, and you sure as hell can't trust anything you see and hear from the government.
Okay, so and then from that point on, and this was early in your career, so what then did you start homing in on? Is it kind of like one of those things where it's you start because everyone that goes through that, they kind of have this almost sinking feeling in their gut where they once you start questioning your reality, you start questioning everything.
Right.
And so it's and you kind of feel isolated and alone. So what did you start looking into from there?
Well, I was already interested in UFOs, abduction cases. People like Whitley Strieber and Travis Walton, their cases fascinated me. And I was really interested in this thing called the Face on Mars, which was a artificial structural built monument on the surface of Mars. And a guy named Richard C. Hoagland was the big guy that was pushing that one and really, putting out videos and things. And I decided I had to get involved. And what he was fighting was the NASA conspiracy. And it really was up my alley because I love space, I loved aliens, I loved Mars, I loved, all this stuff having to do with space. And so through a series of not coincidental events, I got introduced to him. I started talking to him. I wrote a article for him when some of the new pictures of the face on Mars came out, and we started working together. And that got me right in. I mean, that's the teeth of the conspiracy thing right there, because Hoagland was probably the biggest, most popular conspiracy theorist, certainly on the Art Bell show, Coast to Coast AM,
and then
at that time, which was where most people got their conspiracy info.
His website was really great, and I was always wondering how you kind of met up with him. So he liked the fact that you're like a young aerospace engineer that kind of like would lend credibility to basically, researching with him.
Yeah, and I could write. I mean, I'm not going to puff myself up too much, but I'm a great writer.
No, you should check out some of his books. They're really good.
And I think that enabled me to communicate. What I realized decades ago is that the biggest talent that I have, I think, is take very complex technical information and make it seem simple to people. That's what I can do, and that's what I was able to do for him on his website. And so one day I said, we put all these articles out on the web, and it's funny because people don't appreciate what they don't pay for. It's really, really weird. They don't remember, it doesn't sink in. And I said, let's put them all together in a book. Let's put all these articles together. And so that was the beginning of Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA, which was the first book I wrote with Richard Hoagland, and it was a New York Times bestseller. It was very successful, probably close to 100,000 copies of that one now. And it's kind of, it's essential reading if you're a conspiracy theorist. And so that was, that's what we did. And that got me started on this whole path that I'm on now. Led me right here to you.
Awesome. So, and before we move on, his website, Dark Mission, I think is what it was called.
It was enterprisemission.com, yeah.
And your book was Dark Mission. So what happened to him? Like, he seemed like he just disappeared.
He has kind of disappeared. He's gone into retirement. Richard was not. He's a genius. I mean, look, not to sound again too full of myself, but when I walk into a room, I feel like I'm the smartest guy in the room, except when he's around. Then I think to myself, I'm not sure I'm the smartest guy in the room right now. He's a genius, and he's also a little bit of a mad scientist. He's very difficult to work with. He's such a perfectionist, and perfectionists sometimes I think about things that don't matter, and he rubs people the wrong way. And unfortunately, I think in the UFO community, he's burned a lot of bridges, and so he's kind of gone into isolation. He does do some internet radio. I personally haven't talked to him in a few years.
Oh, wow.
And, we just, I hear he once in a while he'll take a shot at me because I'm on TV and he's not. But, again, I hold no ill will. That's human nature. And so I'm not going to really hold it against him that we don't get along anymore. But, after Dark Mission, we looked at Dark Mission 2. It just was not what I wanted to do at the time. I wanted to move on to more physics-oriented stuff and spiritualism and how they were connected. And so we kind of really haven't worked together.
Okay. Yeah, I was just like sort of wondering like if he was got to or something like that. But that's much, and that's I guess.
No, I think he's just worn out his welcome with a lot of people.
Okay. Well, and I think the problem
to
is
be honest,
too, when you go into this conspiracy field, you start to like wonder if everything's a conspiracy. So you don't hear from someone, you're like, oh, the government got him.
The government got him. Yeah. Well, like what happened to Robert David Steele here just recently.
Yeah. Do you know? Not to jump onto that too much, but like, do you think that he was taken out because he was too vocal?
It could be. He could have been given COVID. You could have been exposed to COVID. Certainly, it was not treated properly, and he was not allowed access to hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, which are both cures. So, and I think that's probably what ended up getting him in the end. Once they put you on a ventilator, they're basically killing you, I think.
Yeah.
We talked about this the other day.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean,
I
don't know.
Yeah.
I think there is a certain amount of neglect, but what that shows you, too, is that you've got to have somebody around you in your family that will go in and take you out of a hospital if they try to put you in one,
Right, because their treatment protocols are just basically like a ticket to death.
A ticket to death, yeah. That's basically what it is. Right?
No, okay, so and what the story that we talked about when I picked him up from the airport, picked you up from the airport, is there's a neighbor of mine that works in an ICU here that deals with all the COVID patients, and at the height of it, they had people in their 30s that couldn't breathe, and so they would basically cut their jugular artery and oxygenate it, like their own blood, and 95% of the patients died.
Yeah.
And she was like, oh, it's because COVID's so bad. And I just couldn't believe I was hearing a person say, in my mind, they murdered them.
I would agree with that assessment, and COVID is just the flu. It may be kind of a virulent flu, but it's just the flu. I had a really bad stomach flu about 2 months ago. It's the flu. It sucks. You get over it.
Yeah. So okay, so back to the topic at hand. So then, where did you start? Basically, like, because now we're going to look today at like what is the big picture of what's going on the
Right.
Earth. So kind of where did you sort of start seeing like the different tendrils of this, going, or like kind of like what was your sort of awakening from that point of the TWA flight? What next kind of like gave you the next level of awareness?
Well, when NASA started taking pictures of Mars, the face on Mars, let's say, and they were deliberately manipulating the images to make them look like rocks instead of artificial structures, which is
Okay.
exactly what they were. I fought that fight for 8 or 10 years with Hoagland, and just having them lie to us all the time. I went to NASA presentations, and they would allow public questions, and as soon as I would say my name, all the NASA scientists would run, and I literally ran and hid behind curtains rather than take my questions. And we just caught them in so many lies. They tried to set us up. They tried to make us look bad. They tried to feed us false information. We were able to figure out the good stuff. It just went on and on like that for 8 or 10 years. And I realized that they were lying over and over and over again about the existence of a prior civilization on Mars and also on the moon. And we absolutely showed that stuff in our pictures and the things that we saw and the things that we presented. And so that, to me, became reinforced everything I already knew. But it wasn't until I started delving into the Kennedy assassination that I began to realize, well, this stuff is all connected. There's actually, I think, actually an ancient aliens connection in John F. Kennedy's death. I think what he was going to talk and reveal to people about aliens was the final straw that got him assassinated. And then I began to look at the assassination and who was involved in it. And I began to realize that there was this deep state. So you combine that with what I knew about physics and the physics of this time that we're in, which all came from Hoagland's hyperdimensional physics theories, right? When I learned about all that stuff, I started looking at, I wrote a book called The Choice in 2010, which was about astronomy, astrology, how it's connected, how physics and metaphysics are the same thing. If you look at the basis and you look at what was going on at that time and what 2012 was going to be all about, and how we were going to go into a period of extreme chaos between 2012 and 2024, is what I saw and what I predicted in the book. And I didn't specifically say Donald Trump is going to get elected, but I said somebody out of left field, somebody you would never expect is going to become president, or you're going to have weird things happen. Aliens are going to start walking down the street and people are going to see them. You're going to have all this crazy stuff happening, and our hierarchies and our structures, our monetary systems, our government agencies are all going to come under intense pressure in this 12-year period, and most of them are going to collapse. And that's exactly what's happening. So as I begin to watch this pattern evolve, I could see very clearly that it connected back to Kennedy and his assassination. And then I began to see what I predicted in 2010 start playing out in 2015, 2016 with Brexit and all that stuff. And it's at its peak right about today, 2021.
So, yeah, and so to kind of help connect the dots and stuff, I want to ask another question. But like, why did you see it as 2024 from like 2012 was the end of the Mayan calendar and their whole religion was astrology.
Right.
So why 2024? Was that something within the Mayan calendar, or was that something further?
The Mayan calendar, it's 5,125 years. And what I found is that in a lot of the Vedic teachings, a lot of the ancient Indian civilizations, that 5,125 year cycle was connected. And I went back and I looked and I traced the beginning of their cycle was about 12 years off of the Mayan cycle. And so I thought, well, okay, so what if the Mayan is the opening of the window, and the other one, 12 years later, is the closing of the window, where we're going to have all this change and shift and manipulation. And so when I put the two cycles together, I got 2012 and 2024.
Okay, and that makes sense. And
if you add 5,125 years to the start of their cycles.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, and then but. Good. There's like a 13 moon calendar. I was just trying to do some other math and go even deeper. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
It can get too complex.
Yeah.
You got to keep it as simple as you can.
So at the end of it, what do you see happening? Like the resolve of it.
I think the complete overthrow of our existing government hierarchies and structures. I mean, you look at Pisces is an occulted age, And these 2,160 year cycles have meaning. We're moving into Aquarius, which is an age of enlightenment. The word apocalypse, everybody said, oh, 2012 is going to be an apocalypse. Well, it was, because you know what the word apocalypse means? It means to lift the veil. So all of the lies that we've been told for 2,000 years, the veil is being lifted on them. And when we see that, it's going to be a revolution. So we're going to have completely new forms of government. Our hierarchies and structures are all going to be changed. Our monetary structure is going to change. Everything that we have invested in as our reality is going to shift. We have an opportunity to create a new way of governing and being governed, and with different sets of principles to be guided by. And I really think that by the time we get through this entire cycle, we are supposed to be in a golden age, and I do still believe it's coming in spite of how terrible things look right now.
It's interesting because in the conclusion of my 2012 The End documentary, it was like that we were going to overthrow the lords of the underworld that ruled the previous age, and it was a death, and it's like and it has death pangs, but then there would be like a rebirth into it, like the new age, the new order.
Exactly.
I don't know. I mean, I've kind of gotten back into my faith with Christianity, so I don't. But it's interesting. Anyway, so, and to connect the dots for people that aren't familiar with you, your main thesis, if I'm correct, is that all our missions right now are basically to collect ancient alien artifacts.
Yes. The Apollo missions, for instance, the very first mission, Apollo 11, was purely symbolic. It was fly to the moon, get down there. Buzz Aldrin then consecrated the moon as a Masonic temple because he took a Masonic ceremonial apron with him and performed a Masonic ceremony in the lunar module before he and Neil Armstrong went out on their first historic moonwalk. But all the missions after that were landing in or near specific areas where there were ruins. And they were designed, yes, to retrieve technology. And I've actually traced down pieces of technology that you can see in pictures, like on Apollo 17, that I'm positive that they brought back.
As far as why it would be some sort of Masonic ritual, is in your book, Ancient Aliens and Secret Societies, I remember that you gave kind of this idea that there was an ancient alien knowledge that had been kind of passed down through secret societies as sort of like the secret keeper mechanism. So is the idea that the locations of where NASA landed was held all the way back, like through secret societies, as to where to land?
Yeah, their landing sites and times were all dedicated based on the ancient stellar religion of the ancient Egyptians. So you got the Egyptian gods, Isis, Osiris, Horus, and they were worshipped actually by the people inside NASA. And you can look at that because what you see inside NASA is that it were dominated by three secret societies: the Freemasons, the Nazis, and a group that I call the magicians, who operated at JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory out here at Pasadena. And they were worshipers of Aleister Crowley, who was very much into all this stuff. But when you dig into those three secret societies, they all have the same basic belief system at their core, which is that the ancient Egyptian gods, Isis, Osiris, Horus, and Seth, were extraterrestrials who came here from another world. The Germans believed, the Nazis believed that they had pure Aryan blood and all that stuff. And, that they were gods who came from space. So in the Egyptian stellar religion, for instance, the belt of Orion was very, very important. The three belt stars of Orion were very important. The number 33 is very important. We later discovered part of the secret code was 19.5 degrees. 19.5 degrees was very important. So when Buzz Aldrin performed his Masonic ritual at the Apollo 11 landing site on January 20th, 1969, he did so with the star Sirius, which represented Isis, at 19.5 degrees and right over the landing site. And that's the only place on the surface of the moon where you could have that stellar alignment above the landing site at the precise time he did that Masonic ritual, which, by the way, the Masonic ritual is an offering to Osiris. So if you go into the story of Isis, Osiris, Horus, and Seth, all of the symbolism was there. You look at the Apollo mission patch, it has the constellation Orion on it. Well, Apollo is Greek, Orion is Egyptian, so it doesn't make any sense and it doesn't fit. Unless, of course, there's a secret religion behind it. And that's when we begin to realize that they were doing all this stuff. For instance, Osiris was absolutely the same thing as Orion. ISIS was the same thing as the star Sirius. So when you look at the Apollo 16 landing on the moon in 1972, the lunar module was named Orion. You may as well have named it the lunar module Osiris. Lands on the moon and exactly 33 degrees above the landing site at the exact moment that they landed were the 3 belt stars of Orion. And it happened to be on, guess what, April 20th, 1972, which is, wait for it, Hitler's birthday. So you have the Nazis, the Freemasons, the magicians, all accounted for. And I begin to realize that I think it wasn't just that they wanted the auspices of the gods, the star gods, for their endeavors. It wasn't just that. It's that they believed there was something about the physics that made it better for them to attempt to land at these particular times. And so what they did is they picked the landing sites, dates and times based on these stellar alignments, which they did have the technology to figure out back in the 60s. And it was all picked on that basis. It had nothing to do with geology or science or any of that. It had to do more with where can we get near some of these ruins that we know are there and land our spacecraft at that particular time. And the guy who picked the landing sites, Farouk El-Baz, his father was an expert in, guess what, the ancient Egyptian stellar religion of Isis. So it's all connected, you know?
And for like the people that this is all new to, is the idea that there is this intersection between sort of the actual physics of how everything plays out in the world as kind of like a religion that these secret societies know of, and it's also a secret physics that the Nazis and NASA know about that is the real physics of how the world works that they engineer their technology on, and it's suppressed to us and we're given this other alternate fake physics in school?
Yep, there's only a separation between science and mysticism for the plebs, for the public, for those of us who are not in the know. Everybody else understands that there is a linkage between science and mysticism, or physics and mysticism. It all works together. The Nazis understood that. Von Braun knew that. All the Nazi scientists knew it. Everybody inside NASA at the very top levels knew it.
Okay.
All the Freemasons who were running the Apollo program knew it. That's why Buzz Aldrin had to be on the mission to go to Apollo 11, because he had to consecrate the Tranquility Base as a Masonic temple, which it is. If you look at their writing, they absolutely say Tranquility Base is a Masonic temple. It's the first Masonic temple on the moon. And most people don't understand why did Neil Armstrong go out first instead of Buzz Aldrin then?
Because he's a Mason?
No, he went out first because there was only one camera. They were only allowed to take one camera because they were afraid of what you might be seeing in the background. So they only had one physical camera. Neil Armstrong went out first so that he could photograph Buzz Aldrin, the first Freemason on the surface of the moon. That's why Neil went first, and that's why all the pictures you see from Apollo 11, not one of them is Neil Armstrong. They're all of Buzz Aldrin, because he was the most important guy on that mission, not Neil.
So was Neil not a Mason?
Neil was not. His father was, but Neil was not. I don't think he took a lot of this stuff seriously, but he was told, this is what you're going to do.
Okay. And so, okay, I have like 45 different ways my brain's going. And is it as simple just for like people, again, this is new to, that like NASA and Nazi, that like it was essentially because we brought their rocket scientists over, that they were basically just saying, this is our program,
We didn't have an American rocket program. We had a German rocket program. Let's face reality. Okay. We could not have made it to the moon without the Germans and all the other things that they brought with them. And a lot of that, there's a lot of hidden technology, things that I don't think von Braun was necessarily aware of, but some of the other physicists that came over, people like Hermann Oberth, who understood about the high-level physics that the Nazis were working with at the end of World War II, stuff like the Nazi Bell, which is some sort of anti-gravity reactor, I think, that they put inside the Nazi flying saucers to give them the anti-gravity effect.
Using like purple mercury or whatever that stuff is.
Yeah, red mercury and all that stuff. That was all research that had been done by them. And Hermann Oberth, I mean, he was interviewed, and they said, how did you achieve all these incredible technological feats in Nazi Germany? And he said, we had help. And they said, help from who? He said, the people of other worlds. And that story was confirmed by Eric von Daniken. I've confirmed it personally with Eric myself over dinner at AlienCon. He said, Hermann Oberth came to my hotel. He used to be a hotel manager, Eric did, before he went into Ancient Astronauts and Chariots of the Gods. And Oberth was a guest, and he said he asked Herman Oberth if that was true, and he said, yes, it's true. We had help from aliens. We had contact through seances and, these weird spiritual things that from these aliens, and they got all kinds of technical information from them that enabled them to build the V1 and V2 rockets and solve engineering problems and work on these anti-gravity devices. So, and Oberth, by the way, was von Braun's mentor and boss.
Okay. So, and because the Nazis were started by these really weird cults that had this deep knowledge, like the SS Cult of the Black Sun.
The Reich of the Black Sun, the Thule Society, Tool Society,
and they had those women with the long blonde hair with
yes.
their belief that was some sort of spiritual
Maria
channel.
Orsich felt, thankfully she posed nude on numerous occasions.
Yeah, she was quite attractive.
She was fetching.
Yeah.
She was a fetching Aryan woman, we will say. And nobody knows what happened to any of them.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I remember,
they disappeared.
In, Jim Marrs, God bless his soul, I love that guy. He talked about how all the top brass of the SS, they went to Poland where they were developing the Bell when the Allies were closing in, and they all just disappeared from the site of the Bell. So what happened?
Well, Hans Kammler was a guy who was in charge of all that stuff, the Nazi secret weapons programs. And, according to the U.S. government, he died. Of course, according to the U.S. government, he died 4 different times in 4 different ways. The reality is he disappeared. And Hitler was keeping 250,000 troops in Norway for basically no reason at the end of the war, but he kept insisting that he had to keep them there because they were going to develop weapons that were going to still win the war for Germany. And what he was talking about was Kammler's guys who were working on the Nazi Bell, they were working on the V2 technology, they were working on the atomic bombs. And, the only reason the Germans did not develop a bomb is because they could never quite figure out the exact calculation for critical mass. If they'd been able to figure that out, they already had the triggers, they had the bombs, they had all the uranium they needed. The U.S. did not. And they could have built and used atomic bombs had they simply known that equation in 1944 or 45 and might have won the war. And then, the rumor is there were some very, very long-range heavy bombers that could have gone from Norway to Argentina. And a lot of people think that Kammler took that and the plans for the Bell and the prototypes and all that and loaded them up on that plane and flew to Argentina, and then they went on to Antarctica. So
because in those planes, they actually took pictures of New York City, so they went all the way across the Atlantic.
Absolutely.
So and the idea was they were going to drop the nuke when they had it developed.
A dirty bomb, basically, to use radioactive. It would have been a nuclear explosion, but it would have been small. But the radiation would have made New York kind of uninhabitable, and that was one of the plans.
Do you think that the Nazis developed saucers back in World War II, like some people say, and then
looks like it. Yeah, okay. Looks like it. They certainly developed flying wing aircraft. They had the Horton HO-229, which was they had built wood prototypes. They were about ready to go into actual metallic airframes, and the amazing thing about those aircraft is so you look at those. And they fit the description almost exactly of what Kenneth Arnold later reported over Mount Rainier in the state of Washington as the first flying saucer sighting just a year or two after the war, year and a half after the war. And I kind of wonder if maybe what he really saw wasn't actually some German prototype fighters that we had built and were testing out at McCord Air Force Base, which was extremely remote at that time. And then 2 weeks later, the same thing, the same shaped objects are what apparently crashed at Roswell. So I'm thinking, well, I wonder if maybe Arnold didn't make this sighting by happenstance. It hit all the newspapers and they said, well, damn, McCord's not as isolated as we thought. So they got all those airplanes out of there and sent them someplace even more remote, which was Roswell, New Mexico. And what if one of them crashed and that became our mythical Roswell crash? It's possible.
Oh, and you think
because if you look at the shape of the description of the Roswell craft, and Kenneth Arnold's own artist renderings of what he saw, they look like HO-229 German bombers. That's what they look like.
I've never put that together, but you're totally right.
I know.
We'll put a graphic up on that.
Always.
Yeah, smart guy. And then why would they have all the little green men stories? Is that just some cover up the tracks
It
thing?
evolves later. I mean, the thing is, look, if my story is true, I would think that they would be able to declassify that by now to end the speculation. They haven't done that, so my story is probably not true. But it's, I think it's still a 40% possibility that that's what really crashed at Roswell.
I would believe that like us like kind of tinkering around with the beginnings of Nazi anti-gravity technology or whatever Nazi technology and crashing it is a lot more feasible than these things. This is what always has gotten me. These things coming from another solar
it's
system.
really interesting. The reason why Kenneth Arnold described them as flying saucers is because he said they had this weird sort of skipping motion. They just kind of were jumping all over the place. And one of the problems with the flying wing, why we were never able to master the flying wing until the B-2 in the 1990s, is because you had to have fly-by-wire computer technology because they were inherently very unstable airframes. And an unstable airframe is going to bounce all over the place
hilarious.
and do weird things, and they're going to be very difficult to control. And then the other thing, too, is Kenneth Arnold, his drawings and the Roswell drawings, they had the cockpit area in the middle. And the HO-229 had the cockpit area in the front. Now, if you want to stabilize an airframe, this is my aerospace engineer speaking, that's one of the first things you're going to do is move the balance of it back into the middle. So if you move the cockpit back, you're going to move a lot of the weight back. That's going to make it a more stable airframe. Probably still not stable enough with 1947 technology, but there's so many pieces that fit this. I still think, I'm willing to throw this out here.
Well, okay, versus, and I don't mean to like make too big a thing on this, literally you have beings that fly all the way across from another solar system only to get here and then fuck up and like crash.
Yeah,
I mean,
our
like
radar knocks them down.
Yeah.
Our 1940s technology radar knocks them down. It seems unlikely, but it's possible. You know, I think we got to look 50-50 at that as an explanation for Roswell, especially because most of the stories about Roswell came out 20, 30 years later. You know, Jesse Marcel didn't speak until the 1970s. Yeah. That's 30 years afterwards.
Yep. So we're going to the moon with knowledge that there was a prior ancient alien civilization on there.
Kennedy knew there was extraterrestrial technology there. And yes, alien technology.
Was he part of the secret society network? That's how he knew it?
No, he hated it. He fought against it. I mean, he gave a speech called "The President and the Press" where he talked about secret societies, and we're all opposed to their influence. And I need you, the press, if we're going to stay a free country, to help me fight these people. Instead, now what we have is the press is defected over to their side.
Well, and didn't he die just a few days after that speech?
No, that speech was actually in April of 1961.
Okay.
What happened is that he made a proposal to Nikita Khrushchev on numerous occasions to go to the moon together with the Soviet Union. Why fight? Why spend the extra money? Why have a destructive space race? Why don't we pool our efforts and go together? It would be great for mankind to come together. Now, if that isn't signing your own death warrant against the deep state who wants wars and wants all this stuff to happen, all this conflict all the time, I don't know what is. But he made the proposal twice. Khrushchev rejected it twice. The third time he made it was in September of 1963, September 20th of 63, at the UN, where he suggested we go to the moon together. All of the usual suspects, Congressman Albert Thomas of Houston, who controlled the funding for NASA, vehemently opposed it. And yet nothing happened. But then what happened is that about 10 days before his assassination, on November 12th, 1963, he signed 2 executive orders, a national security memorandum, one to the director of the CIA and one to the director of NASA, ordering them to open an office to begin an exchange of information with the Soviet Union, including any information we had about what he called bona fide UFOs. He would not have done that unless Khrushchev had accepted his offer. And what Khrushchev's son, Sergei Khrushchev, says now publicly, has stated on numerous occasions, is that he went for a walk with his father, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, in late October, early November, 1963. And he said, the Americans are ahead of us now. We were ahead, but now they're ahead of us. We're not going to be able to catch them. I'm going to have to accept Kennedy's offer. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's probably the best way to stop the conflict between our two countries. So if Khrushchev had accepted and Kennedy had ordered the offices to open up and the information to be exchanged, what that means is we were going to go to the moon together with the Soviets, which means they would have gotten access to the alien technology that we would have recovered from the moon missions. That was as unacceptable as anything could be to the deep state, to the CIA. They wanted that information. They wanted that technology for themselves and only themselves. And that's when they decided that he had to be killed. There were numerous other reasons to kill him, but that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And 10 days later, they carried out their plans in Dealey Plaza.
And then the world never knew what happened.
The world knew something was wrong, but, and again, there are people that say now that that incident is what started the current process, which led ultimately to Donald Trump, which hopefully is going to lead ultimately to the restoration of the Trump presidency at some point here in the near future. And the exposure, the complete exposure of the deep state, that began the 60-year plan. 60 years? Yeah, to
root them out.
Root them out.
So is that the idea that it alerted the patriots that were on the side of Kennedy and America that, like, hey, we have this, like, these traitors amongst us and we need to, like, work? Okay.
Yep.
So we have a lot of threads going, but, like, so we go up there. They now have Kennedy out of the way. They go up there, or, like, during this process they do. And what did they find? Like, that's kind of my question. Like, I mean, and they knew these sites where what a civilization once existed that was, like, spanning the solar system?
Yeah, I can show you some of the things they found. Okay, so this is a photograph, a satellite photograph of the Apollo 17 landing site. This is a last mission to the moon, and the one where they most overtly went there to retrieve technology. They landed in an area where there were all sorts of interesting formations. This is called the South Massif, or South Mountain. That's a French word for the means mountain. And if you notice the shape of this thing, it's basically hexagonal. Now, it's kind of interesting because you've got some debris down at the bottom. It looks like the back end of this thing was blown out by some sort of internal explosion. And that's really what you see very consistently on the moon, is you see evidence of damage. Here is another angle of this particular thing at a higher resolution. And you notice that there's this debris in the front of it. And if you look at that a little closer, what you see is that debris field there's this area that's marked with the A there. It's called Nansen, and NASA says it's a crater, but it's not actually a crater. It appears to be like a V-shaped depression just underneath this mountain that actually goes underneath it. Now, on the second day that they had landed there, they were there 3 days on Apollo 17, they got in the rover and they basically made a beeline for this area called Nansen on the South Massif. That's the first place they went. They were definitely headed there with specificity. And along the way, they passed by these other mountains. Now, if you look at this mountain, it's very unusual looking. You see the crosshatch pattern that's on there? You see the horizontal lines, and then the vertical lines. I mean, if you look at these things in really high resolution, those are condos. There is no natural explanation for those formations on the moon, where the only geologic formations that are going, the only geologic activity that's going on is volcanism and the occasional meteor strike. If you look at these things, they're incredible. There's a little bit better shot of it. You can see where you got this crosshatch pattern. It looks exactly like condos built into the side of a mountain. It's bizarre.
Or were you talking about like a structure that had levels, basically?
Had levels built into the side of a mountain, or like a housing development would be built into the side of a mountain, like around Las Vegas today.
And okay, how for scale, like how big is this?
Oh, that's a few miles away. That would be, those square areas there would be the size of a single family home. So from this distance, so they're basically scaled out to human. Then you have these other things where you see these structural spars. See that thing? It's just sagging and leaning right over this hill as you look at some of these images. And it's funny because in a lot of the NASA images, these things are airbrushed out. But if you go back to the basic negatives, the originals, they're there. So NASA's covered this stuff. This thing is probably, that spar itself is probably 400 or 500 feet tall. At a minimum.
So, and what do you say to the people that are like, oh, well, that's evidence that was like a set, and this is all faked, and that's a wire, and
yeah, that's complete nonsense, and I can debunk that about 15 different ways. So I don't really pay any attention to that. The cameras were set at infinity, which means this had to be several miles away. Did they really build a set that was miles long? No, this is on the moon.
Okay.
This is on the moon, and we know that they're on the moon. This is an overexposure of some of the same images. You can see that there's some sort of shield up there. That's like a glass structure with holes punched in it. But the key thing here is that when they went up to Nansen there at the bottom, see the lower left there, they got in the rover and they drove right up to that little black notch there. And when they got there, they parked it basically right above this thing. And along the way, there's some other interesting pictures of stuff along the way. This is supposed to be a rock, and it doesn't look like any rock I've ever seen. I don't know what it is, but it looks to me like, as an engineer, it looks to me like a piece of equipment. But when they got up there to the top of Nansen, they're now on the top looking down. That's this so-called crater. It's not a crater. Again, it's a V-shaped depression with a shadow that leads underneath this hexagonal-shaped mountain. And the thing that's so bizarre is that when they got there with the rover, they turned the camera on. And the astronauts go off the camera for about 20, 25 minutes. And the camera pans around at everything except what the astronauts are doing. And when they get back to the rover, they said, we haven't been able to look around any more than what you guys have seen. Meaning, I think it means they tried to get in to that entrance and they were not able to get into it. But I'm sitting there thinking, we didn't see anything. We saw absolutely nothing. So then there's some other weird pictures of like a pyramidal structure that people are saying is part of the rover or overexposure, but...
So you think that was like an entrance to like basically like a cave or a complex and they were trying to get inside?
That whole hexagonal mountain with the back end blown out was artificial. And this was an entrance to it.
And so they thought that maybe there was like the inside, the structure was still intact.
They were sent there to go and see if they could find some technology. And then the next thing they did is they went off to a crater called Shorty. And when they got to Shorty, they discovered some really interesting stuff. For instance, they discovered orange soil, which really freaked them out at the time. But what's interesting is that as one of the astronauts, Harrison Schmitt, was taking pictures in color of this crater, you can see the moon's a lot more colorful than they've led us to believe. Has to do with the glass structures above that are bouncing light all over the place. But as he took these pictures, he panned around, you see the inside of the crater. Now, it looks like a bunch of rocks, but as you look up closer at some of these images, what you can see is that these things don't really look like rocks. They look like weird sort of vented mechanical stuff. When you get them in color, they glow, they're shiny, like they're metallic. This thing at the bottom, that's not a rock. I don't know what the hell that is, but it looks like it's got exhaust tubes and vents and all kinds of stuff as an engineer that I recognize as mechanical fittings. And then there was this thing in the upper part of that image.
Oh, yeah. I remember.
And they're like, okay, so there's the weird vented thing down there at the bottom, and then up above it is this weird thing. And it looks, for all the world, like, I don't know, C-3PO's head. And the weird thing is it has two eyes, a socket, two eye sockets, a nose, a mouth, and a red stripe painted across the upper part of the upper lip. Looks like the lower jaw structure is missing.
Android's head. I mean, it does look like that.
So,
so I feel like I've seen a higher resolution of this before.
Yeah, well, it just you're losing resolution off the computer to the screen.
So, I mean, it could be an android's head, or it could just be like maybe like a mask or like a like some sort of technology.
Space helmet. I don't know. But the thing is that if you go back and look, there is no problem with them getting down into that crater and retrieving that object. That object is kind of right in the upper middle part right there.
And then this, the orange bits, could that be oxidation from
It's oxidated soil. Yeah, it is oxidated soil.
Does that mean that it could have been metal at some point that rusted over eons or whatever?
Yep. And it could have been mechanical. So this is the kind of thing I think that they saw, and it's the kind of thing that they retrieved, and I suspect they brought back. It's like a Terminator 2 scenario. Well, you bring back the alien technology, or the technology from the future, and you reverse engineer it. And I think that's what we've been doing for 45, 50 years. That's where I was going
to go next. But like if I look at how it looks all dark and everything there, I mean, what this looks like to me is that there was something here and somebody had some high-powered weaponry that they just blasted it from space and it blew up and burned.
I mean, I think really, not to go out on a limb here, but I think really what you're looking at there is you're looking at some kind of robot that was blown up in whatever created that crater, some bomb or something, like as part of a war, who knows? But it looks like a piece of machinery and equipment. Yeah, that's what it is. It's just bizarre stuff.
Yeah, Joseph P. Farrell talks about a war, in the solar system, and And I mean, we can get further. We'll go further down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's just real speculation. We don't know, but I mean, that's certainly one of the things that makes sense.
But then, okay, here's what I can't help but note is this, because this is in the late '60s, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say they found something and they come back with it, and then it was about what, a decade, 2 decades later, that all of a sudden all the computing technology just starts proliferating everywhere.
Yep.
The cell phones, everything, and they're all from these private companies, right?
Well, yeah, and there was a natural progression there, but it was understanding superconductivity and superconductors, and that may have been what we got from what we retrieved. That may have been the big thing that, oh, if you keep temperatures really, really low, you can have superconductivity, and that leads to these very complex computer chips, computer brains.
Wow. And then all of a sudden it's like, then this like computer network we're kind of using to enslave the world, right?
Yes, the internet. The internet, yes.
Okay. All right, so then the next step then, after you sort of figured out that there was this secret knowledge of an ancient alien civilization that we went into space to retrieve, I assume on the Mars landings, the same deal we've been collecting.
Well, we haven't brought anything back from Mars, so it's really difficult to do that. But we've certainly gone and looked to see what was there. And I think trying to determine what happened to that civilization. And I believe the answer to that is some sort of war, some sort of cataclysmic disaster that destroyed the civilization on the planet Mars. Because here's the thing politically, it's all political. People say, oh, you're too political now. Why don't you talk about aliens? Well, aliens are political. I got news for you. Aliens are political. The argument about aliens is political. The exposure of these stupid TTSA videos, which are nothing but drones, is all political. It's designed to create a political environment, possibly to distract, but I think more so to basically just create a misinformed public as to what aliens really are. I think aliens are coming, and they can't stop them, so what they want to do now is try to predefine them early and often as hostile before they even get here. So that's what I think the agenda is. So this ultimately leads to the fact that you're talking about a political discussion, because here's the thing. If NASA gets up there and holds a press conference and says, well, face on Mars turns out to be real. It is artificial. There was a whole civilization all over Mars. We've even got some underground stuff here. We saw in the infrared. Look at this. It's amazing. They're all gone. It's wiped out. Ancient civilization, no threat to us today. Okay, but the first question you're going to ask is, well, okay, so there was some super advanced extraterrestrial or alien civilization or humanoid civilization, because the face on Mars looks human, that existed centuries ago, eons ago on Mars. What happened to them? And if the answer is, well, the planet that Mars was a moon of and it was orbiting exploded, or it was blown up in a war, that's going to make some super uncomfortable questions. Now, I think that most of the stuff that we see, most of the ruins we see, most of the technology, it looks human because it's related to us as humans. That's why, there's a big argument about what Neil Armstrong said when he stepped on the surface of the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And people have argued, well, that doesn't make any sense. He must have said that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. But it does make complete sense in the context of that's one small step for man, this version of humanity that is descendant from the Anunnaki or these other more advanced technologically human civilizations that flourished throughout the solar system in decades and eons past. It's one small step for us. It's one giant leap for the greater mankind that we are all part of. That we and the Anunnaki and the visitors and whoever that are all humanoid, then it is a giant leap for us because we're returning to the stars from whence we came.
And we got the technology now that's going to help us leap
and
forward
so
and do that.
I think Neil Armstrong said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said.
Okay.
And it was a message to anybody who understood what the real game was.
Okay. So then we have this technology. Do you feel like the first missions were basically kind of reconnaissance, and then the other ones, like the later ones, were to take it back?
Well, Apollo 11 was some reconnaissance, but it was basically to set up the ritual and to prove out the technology and make sure we could do it. Starting with Apollo 12, they landed right smack in the middle of these areas that they knew that there were these towering glass structures, which I've talked about in numerous presentations over the years, and Hoagland has talked about. And They did some things in secret. For instance, we know that on Apollo 12, the second mission, they landed. They basically followed the exact same track as Surveyor 2, which landed in a crater a couple hundred yards from where Apollo 12 landed. So we followed the exact track because we were trying to work our way through all of this towering glass stuff that was, and the reason they used glass was it would be an effective meteor shield in a vacuum environment. Glass is much, much stronger in a vacuum than it is here on Earth.
Strong enough to like repel a meteor that hits it?
To be a meteor shield, be a very effective meteor shield. So they followed it through, they landed in the same place, but they knew that there was this stuff all around them, and they probably had some stuff within walking distance of the lunar module. So one of the things we've just discovered since Apollo 12, really discovered only since probably 2012, is that they did a secret EVA, what they call a stand-up EVA, where the astronauts stood up on top of the engine mount casing in the lunar module, stuck their heads out of the top of the lunar module, and looked around to see what you could see. Because that was their big concern is, well, if there's this glass stuff over the horizon, what if it shows up on camera? How are we going to explain it? They stuck their heads out, they looked around. We've confirmed this through, you can look at the transcripts, you can look at the fact that the Capcom, who does the EVAs, they have a different capsule communications guy for EVAs than they do for landing and all that other stuff and regular communication. He had taken over. There's an 18-minute gap, 19-minute gap in there where there's no communication, where they're supposed to be reporting what they see out the windows, blah, 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 and what their exact position is. They didn't do any of that stuff. And it appears, if you look at the oxygen levels, that they did decompress the space capsule before they ever went out for their EVA, like way earlier than they were supposed to. And so what they did is they went out and they looked around and they said, oh crap, people are going to be able to see this, because they had a much better color camera with them this time around.
Did they land inside a hole inside the
yeah,
dome?
there was a hatch at the top. That was the ingress-egress hatch to go to the command module.
No, I'm talking about like in the dome itself. Did they land?
They flew through this stuff. Yeah, they
were inside the dome.
They were inside these glass structures. It was probably open to the vacuum because something had shattered through it.
The roof.
And there was probably also ruins all around them. And after they did that, they went out, and the first thing Alan Bean did was the exact thing he was trained not to do. He took the camera, he pointed it directly at the sun, and burned out the optics, so we never got any clear footage from the Apollo 12 landing site for the entire mission. All we got was still photographs, and when you enhance those, you see all the structure around the landing site. So there was deception, lies, all the time with NASA. Constantly.
Okay, so he burned the camera on purpose. That's crazy. So we get some technology from there. We come back. They start developing it in secret in these corporations.
Sure.
And like, I mean, what is sort of your? I mean, we could go two different ways, but what was sort of your next step in then this kind of global conspiracy picture with the deep state - secret society network running the show in America, trying to take over America and the world? What's kind of the next step you became aware of?
Well, amazingly, I wrote a book about that.
See the rest in part 2, The Secret Plan to Enslave the Human Race, with Mike Bara.